Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. I want to say thank you, everyone, so much for joining us tonight. I'm super excited because we have a fantasy event tonight. Epic fantasy, actually. We have Leslie Penelope for the third book in her trilogy, and the title is Cry of Metal and Bone, which is such a good title. And then she's going to be in conversation tonight with Kate Arsenault Rivera, who many of you are also familiar with, The Tiger's Daughter. The 3 books are out in that series as well. And I'm so excited. Penelope's series is a staff favorite. And Kylie's working the event with us too. So shout out Kylie for writing an awesome review for it. But I'm going to go ahead and let our amazing authors take it away. And make sure if you have questions, there is a beautiful ask a question button down below. So make sure you put those questions because they are going to be answering them for you. And in the virtual world we live in, I am beyond excited because we are offering you signed and personalized books from both authors, which is so ridiculously freaking cool that, yeah, I'm just going to leave on that high note and let them talk awesome book things. And have an amazing event, guys.
Thank you. All right, so if we're going to talk about awesome book stuff and we're going to talk about fantasy, I feel like we would be remiss if we started anywhere except world building, particularly because yours is so good. So for those of you who have not read any of Leslie's work, firstly, what are you doing? But secondly, I think this is like some of the most intricate world building that I've seen in terms of not only our and different races and different nations and different religions, but they also don't seem too heavily borrowed from any one place or the other. They feel original and they feel organic. And that is incredibly difficult to do. Now, when you're a writer and you're reading another writer's work, I think you can sympathize with this. Sometimes you'll just look at something and go, how the fuck did you put that together? Like, knowing all of the little things you have to thread in, you just look at this complete piece and you're like, where did it start? So that's my question to you. Like, how did you start with this incredibly intricate world building?
For the world building for me, I think started with the time period. Because I knew if I was writing something, I didn't want to do medieval. I like fantasy, but that is like played out. So I had read one of Matthew Stiefvater's books, The Scorpio Races, and it takes place in this like unknown early 20th century time period. And I liked the idea of that, of having some technology, but so there's telephones, there's cars, there's guns, and you can, get places more quickly. I don't have to worry about horse travel so much. There's a little horse travel, interesting cities, but like, yeah, but it's still the past. And so you still have like that sheen and that kind of, sexiness of not having all of the technology that we have and the opportunities for conflict. So once I had the time period, then I was sort of just visuals. And like when I first was talking to my editor, when I sold it to St. Martin's, she was asking me like, what is it based on? Is it African? Is it European? Like what culture is it based on? And that's kind of the expected thing. And for me, it was like, well, let me just take a little bit from different places, because I didn't want to base it on Africa per se, because I'm Black, but I'm American, and I would have to do a lot of research, and that's my culture, but not my culture at the same time.
Are you telling me that all Black people aren't born knowing everything about African culture? That's ridiculous. Everyone on Twitter tells me very differently.
Right? Yeah, imagine that. So in the books, there's kind of based on there's Western culture, and then there's a desert society. So like for the Lagomar, the desert nation, I was like, well, what's common to different desert nations all around the world and different desert cultures and societies? What are the things that they're going to have that's going to overlap? And then, okay, I'll pick from those and create something new. So that's basically how I went about doing something that was original. But, I looked at the geography and the climate and all of that stuff and picked it from different places. So it's not too much of one thing. It's a little bit of everything. And then it becomes new and different. And then you add the diesel punk in there and you can just have really
See, when you put it that way, it sounds so simple and so straightforward. And when you read it, there's just so many layers. So it's it's awesome to hear how you went about that process. And I don't think I would have thought to do that, to look at the commonalities between all the cultures, but that's a really cool way to approach it. What did you find were some of the commonalities? Was there anything that surprised you while you were doing that research?
Well, I was like, for instance, I would look at, okay, what is housing like? How are you going to make a house in the desert? There's not a lot of trees, you're not going to build out of wood. So I was looking up like Afghanistan and then like deserts in America and, all over the place and came up with clay. And so things like that, where it's like, there's a lot of like adobe or adobo, but like clay all over the world, like in Mesopotamia. So they're building things out of mud and clay and mixing in straw. And so those types of things where you're kind of using the resources that you have available to you wherever you are location wise. And it's remarkably similar in different places, even though there might be slight tweaks to it, mud bricks versus, whatever the soil is based on, but there's those commonalities. And then like furniture, I was like, well, are they building chairs? Like, how are they? Or they're going to sit on the floor, and that's common in lots of places too. They're going to sit on mats or cushions, and that's not necessarily from any one place. Like, so things like that. As I was researching just food and how they ate and utensils and pottery, and it's surprising how things come up. Or maybe not that surprising, I don't know, but people all over the place have developed similar things at similar points in history, and that was kind of cool to find out about.
Yeah, when you brought up sleeping on the floor, it puts to mind my mom was really big on these History Channel documentaries about the plagues for some reason. And I don't know if you've heard this, you probably have, but one theory about the death of the firstborn was that they would die of carbon monoxide poisoning because the firstborn children would sleep on the floor. Which is actually, it's kind of interesting, and it does gesture back to that. And it is also another case where something that seems very fantastical can sometimes have a very scientific explanation, although I don't know how accurate that is. History Channel documentary. Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea. I know when I was doing research for Tiger's Daughter and for that trilogy, I didn't know anything about steppe life whatsoever. So just finding out how you would even live on the steppes, which are an incredibly inhospitable place. Like, you don't have any trees, it gets so cold, and it's also so hot. There's just so much stuff that you wouldn't even think of until you do the research and you find out how people have survived. But I think one of the things I do like about your writing, and especially about your world building, is that it does feel very human, and it feels very much like people have arrived at these technological advances, maybe via a different way than we usually would have, but the presence of magic doesn't necessarily, you can have magic and you can have technology, which is, I think, something that a lot of fantasy worlds don't do these days. How did you go about the interplay between those two? Because obviously, there's some cultures that have a lot more tech than others in the setting.
Yeah, I was always interested in technology, probably because I'm a web developer and I did a lot of coding and stuff. And so I didn't want to, that's another reason why I didn't want to lose all technology in the world. There's not necessarily, computer programs in it, but I still wanted, like some things. And so, it was kind of layering, like you say, like thinking about what are the values of these different societies and cultures. So in the first book, Song of Blood and Stone, it takes place in El Sierra. And the two main countries are also Sierra and Lagomar. Lagomar is the desert place. El Sierra is like more farmy, but it's got cities and it's got some technology, but the people there are kind of technophobes. So they've really a lot of things. And then
they're phobic of a lot of things.
They're backwards in a lot of ways. It's like, why are they? But that's the culture that's grown up, and there's been this war for 500 years back and forth. So they have their reasons, I guess, for being xenophobic and not liking technology. And if it's not from here, then we don't want it. That kind of thing. And in Inquiry of Metal and Bone, I get to go to another country where they love technology, they've embraced it, and how they've surpassed it. So that's where I really get into some cool diesel punk stuff in megacities, and so in terms of the magic interplaying with the technology, I really just thought back to how people are afraid of things. Like if since the magic isn't held by everybody, it's not universal, then it's fine for other people being afraid of it and for hating it and for not understanding it and then kind of shunning it. So, they've got the people who embrace the magic, and then they're growing up right alongside the people who embrace the technology. And then there's clashes, and then sometimes they do mesh well together and, live harmoniously, and sometimes they don't. So it's just kind of thinking through, how do people act and how do people at their core, like, deal with stuff that's unfamiliar to them, and that everybody's different. There's going to be, I wanted a multitude of different reactions just to kind of show there's different ways of dealing with all of these issues that pop up.
I mean, you definitely do get that range of different reactions and different attitudes. And one thing that I, again, really like is that with fantasy, especially with older fantasy, there's a tendency for everybody from a nation to act the same way. And you don't necessarily see that in your work. And I also like that even within the nation, there are so many different little subgroups, because that's something that you see both in fantasy and in like Star Wars, where every single Syrian is very methodical and sits there and meditates for hours. But
what?
Yeah, it's like, if you look at Earth and the diversity that we have here, which some people don't usually want to acknowledge, you can't look at a fantasy world and say there wouldn't be an equal level of diversity.
I totally agree with that. It never made any sense to me.
No, it doesn't. But speaking about that, you're talking about all these layers here, and we're talking about diversity. How has what's going on impacted your writing? Like, it feels like there are echoes,
Right.
Especially in Cry, as I was reading it, where I was like, oh yeah, I feel that. So have you had to change anything, or how has it impacted your writing?
It's funny because, I write these books, we write a year and a half advance or whatever, however far before the book comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was in copy edits with this one, or past pages, like a final stage. And I was like, oh, no one's going to believe I wrote this a year ago. Because today, like right now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of echoed throughout the series, because I am writing about like real things that are happening. There's a refugee crisis. There's a lot of xenophobia and racism and prejudice of different kinds, homophobia. So it's magic adventure love story too. And I just wanted to meld them together, because you can't, I can't separate it. Like, being Black in America, I can't separate issues like, something recently was talking about how that was a political issue to bring up how Black people were in Jane Austen's times. Like, there was a kerfuffle with some group of historical writers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, we don't want to be political by talking about race. It's like, I don't have luxury to like have that very strange opinion. So everything's really mashed up together, and it's just I haven't had to change anything. And it's just weird how, sometimes you find yourself being more prescient than you thought you were being. Like, I'm talking about things that happened 10 years ago that are also happening today, because lessons yet.
Yeah, it all does work in cycles. And it is funny, I think, how many authors, especially in the genre space, have been saying, well, I wrote it, I didn't want to have to live it. It's a common question you see on panels a lot, like, which one of your works would you want to live in, or what fantasy world do you want to live in? And now we're kind of in a dystopian, like, maybe not a YA novel, but a dystopian novel. And no one likes it.
No, yeah, I don't. There aren't many that I would actually like to live in. I get that question, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I got that on, I think, my first panel that I was on, and I had to think about it for a long time before I finally settled on like a nice planet in the Outer Rim somewhere where no one cares, in Star Wars, where healthcare is mostly free. And because if you think about the other places, it's just like they're getting attacked all the goddamn time.
Right.
And
you can be far enough away that on some planet with not too many resources, like enough that you can survive, but not that any of the the gangs want to come and take it over, or any of the various empires want to take it over.
Just let me be a moisture farmer or something, man. But I think, going back to one of your points, in sometimes existing as a person of color or as a queer person can be political within genre spaces, and it sucks that people do take it as a political statement instead of just like, we've always been reading these works, we've always wanted to interact with these works, and now we are, after all these years of people saying go make your own, and all of a sudden now it's incredibly political.
Right.
You can't win. In some senses, it feels like as a person of color, you're beholden to write, the great struggle novel too.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's not comfortable. Like, I think it's gonna be there on some level. I guess it doesn't have to be. Like, I'm sure there's writing things where there's no struggle on that level. But generally, novels should have some kind of conflict. And I think I talked about this at some point in a podcast, but like, I envision writing a novel where there's no racism in the book at all. It's just some other conflict is happening. And maybe I had to get this out of my system first before I could do that. But yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, it's definitely sometimes when you're writing a novel, especially a fantasy novel or a sci-fi novel, anything where you're creating a new setting, you have to decide how much race is going to factor into it, or what the axis of discrimination is going to be. Well, axes, really, because people are always going to split apart. Another thing that I like about the Earthsinger Chronicles is something that's actually pretty personal to me, is that interracial relationships are such a big thing. And we have multiple different characters who are biracial and who do explore both sides of their personality. And that kind of crushing friction you can sometimes feel between the two sides of yourself when you're forced to align one way or forced to align another way. I thought that was also very well done. So just props on that. Yeah. So my mom's Black and my dad is a very, very white looking Latino man who swears up and down that he is a citizen of the world. But when I was growing up, I never really saw anything like that in movies or, basically any relationships where it was a mixed couple. So reading this, I definitely did feel seen.
That's awesome. Yeah, like I'm not biracial, but I thought the experience of feeling torn between two parents, two countries, two cultures was it's specific, but it's also universal, because there's lots of things that tear people apart that make them feel outcast, like they don't fit in any of these identities or groups that they purport to be a part of. So yeah, that's why Jasmine, the main character of the series, is biracial, and over the course of the books, I'm working on book 4 right now, and so I'm in her head a lot right now. And yeah, it's the last book, and it's like, how do I deal with her shifting identities, and how it's still, every book, I think the characters grow and change and become more comfortable, and they complete a character arc. But that's something that is never going to go away, because the cultures and the societies are the same. So. I tried to relate to it from the point that I could identify and kind of extrapolate from there. So I'm glad that you felt like it captured something.
Yeah, it really did. Speaking about fourth book, and writing the last book, how is that treating you?
Oh, the fourth book is so hard. And not that any of them were easy, because the second book really tried to kill me. The third book was
something about second books.
Second books are evil. They're evil. Oh my gosh. So the fourth book has been a huge challenge. And part of that is because I had 3 books written when I sold the series to St. Martin's. So I had 3 books written in 2016. I revised them all a lot, but I knew what was happening in those books. And then, so it's taken me another 4 years to get to book 4. And at first I didn't think about it. I'm like, I'm going to think about it. So I'm trying to think about it. And I got all so when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh shit, I have to think about it.
I got to think about it real hard.
Right? I knew the basics, but I just knew the basics. I knew where they started and where they ended, and some things that happened. So it's been really interesting. I'm finally in a good place with it. It's due next month. It comes out next year, and then I'll be done with the series. And I have a good feeling about book 4. I feel like I'm on track now, whereas for a long time I was definitely not on track.
I think that happens with the last book in a series, though, because, I wrote a trilogy, and the second book was an absolute bitch and a half. I rewrote it, I think, like 3 or 4 times, a couple of those times within like a month and a half. But then going into the third book, the second book had been so painful to write that the third book almost felt like a balm because I knew where everything was going, roughly. Yeah. Is that something that you're feeling too, as all of the pieces are kind of falling together now that you've done all the thinking?
It took a really long time because I felt like I was just wrangling threads that were just like wildly like hoses. And I was trying to grab this thread and that thread and like pull them together because I had all these characters and all of these.
You got a lot of threads.
I was like, I'll deal with them later, right? Like, no, I mean, I had an idea for it, but when it came time. So yeah, I wasn't sure until this last pass that I had actually wrangled them, and now I'm feeling like I have. So yeah, it hasn't been long. I'm glad it was for you.
Well, when it comes to all of those plot threads, how do you keep track of them while you're writing? Do you do like detailed outlines? It sounds like you do a lot of planning before you sit down to write.
Yeah, I'm definitely a planner and a plotter. So I do detailed outlines before each book. They always change somewhat, but like the basics remain the same. But like my outline for book 4 was 14 pages. I'm like, well, all I have is these 14 pages. So if you want me to cut that down, because that's going to take me to like, read all 14, you'll know what happens in the book. And I have all these different techniques that I like pull out at different times. So like one day I'll be like writing on note cards, and another day I'll be on sticky notes and like a whiteboard. And it's hard to keep in my head. It is in my head now. I do things on spreadsheets. I have like half a dozen spreadsheets. I have notebooks. And like I'm literally going from one system to another, from the spreadsheet to the notebook to the sticky notes. And somehow it works. It's chaotic. And I wish I could do it in a more simple way. But that's just how my brain works. I'm juggling all the time.
I mean, that makes sense to me, though, because sometimes in order to really make sure that you understand what's going on, you need to do it in a different venue. And sometimes like refreshing the mechanism of how you're planning can give you more of those creative juices too. I've heard that you never really learn how to write every book. You just learn how to write the book you're writing. And that feels very accurate to me, because I feel like every single process for every single thing I've worked on has been very different in that sense. Even the outlines, 14 pages, my God.
I don't know. So you're a planner? You're a plotter?
I mean, when it came to Tiger's Daughter, that actually started as a very long character backstory for a tabletop RPG game I was in. So I knew what the end point was, and I knew what the start point was, but there was a lot in the middle that I couldn't quite get to. And actually, in the course of writing it, I decided that Shefali was going to contract the Black Blood, which is a huge departure from what her character was in the tabletop game. So I do like having a little bit of room to veer wildly off course and see where that takes me, because I feel like it can lead to some, little magical moments, or actually putting somebody in a very tough position. But with later things, I've been doing a lot more outlining, and that's also pretty good too. Although for me, sometimes there's a bit of a frustration where what you're writing doesn't match up with the outline and you're trying to hammer it into shape.
Yeah. I have to be careful of that too, because I tend to be a little rigid. So when I feel like I want it to veer that way, and then I always get stuck, and I have to like take the time to convince myself that it's okay if I can change it. It's fine. Like nobody saw the outline but me and my editor. So yeah, like in between it, pantsing is fun. Like I admit, even with the 14-page outline, obviously the book's 130,000 words. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know in that. And you just discover that as you go, and it can change things down the line. So you do have to be flexible enough to allow yourself that breath and discover things.
And I think that discovery is important too, because if something surprises you while you're writing it, it's certainly going to surprise a reader while they're reading it. And if you can execute it such that there's a natural build toward it, that is really great.
You do that going.
Yeah, even if you just put somebody into a corner and you realize you have to go back and give them something they can use to get out of it, it's still a great moment. What do you think was like the biggest surprise for you in that sense while you were working on the series?
There were a couple of surprises. Because book 2 was so hard and what I was trying to do wasn't working. Like, people say that Whispers of Shadow and Flame ends on a cliffhanger, and I didn't think it was a cliffhanger, but I will offer that opinion. It does sort of stop in the middle of a thing, and that's because I had meant for that story to be in one book. And then as I was writing, I was like, oh no, this is way too much. I can't fit this in one book. I have to split it into 2, and then add the story that was going to be book 3 into that also. And so Arsenault and Bone sort of is the second half of the story that was in the Whispers of Shadow and Flame. That actually surprised me, because I thought I was going to be able to. Originally, there was a whole flashback, and there were different timelines, and that all went away. So another surprise is that I knew after I wrote book 1, I knew there was going to be 4 books, because I was doing this like romance thing. So it's fantasy and there's romance in it, and in romance, a lot of times with your series, you have different couples of books. So I intended, this is going to be a different couple per book, but it's one overarching storyline. And one of the couples changed, and that really surprised me. Somewhere between book 2 and 3, I thought, oh, hold on. And then I had to add Novellas, so I could still write their story that I was going to be in the 4 books. So yeah, like I didn't have a series outline, but I had like these things that were going to happen, and some of that just really got blown out the water.
Those second books, they will get you every single time. Like you look at the outline, you're like, I understand where the story's going. It's going to be fine. We're going to do flashbacks. We're going to layer it. We're going to get more complicated. And then once you get into it, you just realize you're so adrift. And I think another thing that factors into that too, I don't know how much this applied to you. When you write that first book, you have all this time you can spend on it. Right. Polishing it. And then when you're working on the second book, usually the first book's already out and it isn't yours anymore in a lot of ways. It belongs to other people now. And now as you're working on the second book, you feel not only the pressure to do at least as good as you did then on a shorter time span, but also not to let people down.
Exactly. Like the fact that it's out and being read gets in your head.
Yeah.
And it's hard to keep it out of your head. Like I don't read reviews. It's too much. But I do. Like my brother will read my reviews and he'll filter them and he'll tell me little bits and pieces about the nice ones and things like that. So, but just knowing, even if I'm not reading what people's feedback is, knowing that it exists. I think because I was definitely working on, even when the series was originally self-published, the first 2 books, and so even when it was self-published, I was writing the second one and deep in it after I had released the first one. And then even more so on a bigger scale when it went to traditional publishing. And like even more people are reading it. And I'm rewriting the second book at the same time. So that process, like the actual rewriting, that second rewrite wasn't as bad. But that first time through, it gets to you. And so I think I'm better now at shutting out the voices that want to come into my head. But it's still hard. It still can be.
It can be hard to compartmentalize too, like what your own thoughts about something are versus what some nice reviews have said that your strengths are. And it's hard to get out of the idea that people will be reading whatever you're writing, and hard to write without thinking, God, what, they hate me, right? They only like the first book. The second book's going to bomb. It's going to be terrible. Right. At least, yeah.
If you get a bad review, like I read the trade reviews because they send them to me, and if you get a bad review, and like that happened, and I was writing a book, and I'm like, that really like messed me up for a couple of days. So I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it's sometimes even when you get a good trade review, but they say just one thing, like the rest of it can fall away, and you can just focus on a modifier, like an adjective even can just ruin your week.
Can I still do this? Do I know how to write books anymore? Yeah.
What do you mean I mostly succeeded? Where did I not succeed? Can you help me? Like, could you give me bullet points, sticky notes, please?
Exactly.
I think that's an important part of growth as a writer too, is learning to compartmentalize that, especially when you're writing for public consumption, because it's certainly different when you're just writing stuff for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Just critique partners or whatever.
Do you do a lot of private writing just to, I guess, keep yourself afresh and remind yourself why you like writing? Or is that just me?
I actually do. It's mostly when I get stuck. Like, I'll go, there's this website, 750words.com, and I like to go there and just write 750 words off the top of my head. And I did that for, I still do it from time to time now, like if I'm stuck or if I'm just kind of feeling down. And I have like stories running in my head all the time. So I have little snatches of stories that are not the stories I'm writing. They're just like ongoing soap operas in my head with various characters. So sometimes I'll just write pieces of those down. And sometimes they'll turn into stories, and most times they don't, but occasionally they will turn into like a short story or like a novella or something. But they keep you grounded because no one's going to see this. And I like that website because I don't even have to name the file. Like I don't have to save it on my phone. If I give this thing a name, even if it's just like, story about unicorns, .txt or whatever, it's just there for me. That's just how it works in my head. So like being able to save it where it saves automatically, I don't have to give it a name, and it's just no one will ever know it exists unless I do something. It's like refreshing.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that site actually. That sounds pretty cool. I might have to check it out. Yeah. Do you have any other hobbies that you go into when you're writing? For me, like I like to play guitar a lot, and I've lately, because of the pandemic, developed many interesting side hobbies. But sometimes when you're stuck in one mode of creativity, going into another one can help.
Yeah, for me, since my day job is a web developer and coding is really creative, so I get that outlet at work, even though it's not like a hobby necessarily. I've been trying to do like more piano stuff. Like I took piano lessons as a kid, and then I lost all of that ability. So I will play the piano a little bit, but I don't have any cool hobbies like knitting or like crafts or things like that. I'll go take a walk, or I love rock climbing. Go to the climbing gym or something.
Rock climbing's really cool. What do you mean you don't have any cool hobbies? I can't climb a rock wall.
Awesome! Yeah, more people than you probably could if you wanted to try it. It's really fun.
Listen, I know you can't tell looking at me now. I am 4'9". Like that's a lot of vertical distance to cover.
My climbing partner is, I don't know how tall she is. She's like maybe 5'2" or 5'1", which I know is different than 4'9", but she can climb things I can't. So, there's different styles for different sizes of people. And then like the tall guys are like 6'5", and they just reach up to something that I'm like, like everybody has a way to modify for their body. So, yeah.
That is pretty cool. It is pretty cool. So I do notice we have a couple questions here, and I do want to make sure that we get to those. So up top here is, could you tell us a little bit about Earthsinger 3.5?
3.5, yes, that is the Novellas coming in the anthology this fall that I'm in with Jeffrey Kennedy and Melissa Moore and Kelly Armstrong is the new person. So 3.5, all the novellas are lead-ins to the next book. So 3.5 will lead you into book 4. It is called Echoes of Ash and Tears, and it will take place 500 years before the events of the main series. But it is still a lead-in to book 4. So it's fantasy for you. And so there's characters that you meet briefly in Cry, Mel and Bone, that it will follow. I won't spoil that yet. I don't think I've mentioned them before. Someone tell me if I've already talked about it. I don't think I have. And so yeah, it's a look at the past and the kind of the foundations of how we've gotten here, and those characters here again.
Sounds pretty dope. All right. Which scene or section from Cry of Metal and Bone brought you the most joy to write? Which was the hardest?
Ooh, what is even in this book?
That's real, though. That's real. Like, sometimes on Instagram, people will post very lovely images with quotes from Tiger's Daughter, and I'll look at it and I'll go, shit, I wrote that?
because sometimes you write and you're like, I think I'm in a fugue state half the time. Like I have no idea what's happening. Okay, so Cry of Melon Bone. I really like Lisbeth and Ty's interactions. They're the new love story that appears in this, and they're opposites. Ty is like my Han Solo character, and he's a different kind of character than I've written before, so I really liked doing something different and trying to stretch and with him. And there's a scene where they're in this kind of weird museum at this gala, and just the setting is kind of based on a museum that I used to go to when I was a kid. I don't know if you used to, and just like a warped fantasy version of that. But I don't know, that's kind of standing out to me. I like it's a spoiler, so I won't talk about that. The hardest to write, the Cabal scenes. There's some scenes from the perspective of this secret society, and there are only a couple of them. I think there might only be 3 in the book. But because I was trying to obscure a lot of things in those scenes, and because of kind of what I wanted them to do, I wasn't sure if it was working or not. Those were a little bit harder for me to feel good about.
Yeah. Conspiracy themes and even foreshadowing sometimes can be really tricky, because stuff that sometimes you feel like you signposted very well, people will miss on a read, and it's hard to balance how much to tell people. So I can completely understand. All right. Will we see more? Will we see more of Zango? I know there's only one more book, but I want more of him.
Zango gets a cameo, but Zango does not have a lot more page time on top of this. I do like Zango. You see, in the 4th book, I was trying to fit everybody in, and that was one of the things. Because, I mean, he's a small character in book 2. And yeah, there were other people like that. Like, I can this person, and they have like walk on. But yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, it happens. It happens. When I was writing Tiger's Daughter, one of the side characters, one of the moms, ended up being a much bigger character than I thought she was going to be, and I fell deeply in love with her. And then my hand slipped, and I wrote a novella about her backstory. Yeah, but the problem is that she dies in the first book, so she can't come back in the next 2. So the only way to enjoy the character is to go back. Sometimes it is side characters who end up stealing your heart like that.
Definitely.
All right. This is a good question. Do you have a designated writing space? If so, what is it like?
My writing space is basically my office, so I'm here all the time. Ergonomically, I can't really write. I could write in the bed. I can write on the couch a little bit, but various things start to ache. So I try to be like ergonomically, aware of my positioning. So usually I'm at the desk, and my desk is a sit-stand desk. Mm-hmm. So I get tired of sitting, I stand, and like my legs get tired, I sit again. And yeah, so it's just my office right here where I do all my videos. My books are here. All my craft books are within easy reach. So when I have I'm stuck, and I'm like, what did K.M. Weiland say about structure or character arcs? Let me go check, and then just pull out the book and check. So that's it.
It's a good idea to keep your craft books that close, I think. For me, I also just have my office here. I don't have craft books in easy reach. I have some poetry books, but I also have some inspirational art over here on this side. Sometimes I can just look over. It's also important.
That's helpful. Yeah, I think so too. I don't have a lot of art. I've got a couple of things hung up, but yeah. But then my windows, the back of, there's one when it's now summertime. Between the houses, a lot of trees. So, and there's always birds. Half the time they're crashing into the window. But yeah, so there's a lot of nature that I can look out at, and that's also nice.
Yeah, I don't have windows. My partners have the 2 rooms that have windows. So my office is actually what used to be the living room, which we've cordoned off with a screen over there and these flags back here. So having the art helps.
Yeah.
Right, let's see. So, Library Addict has read both St. Martin's editions of Song of Blood and Stone and is amazed at how seamlessly Ella's storyline was woven into the existing story. You've talked before about how you had some of the events originally planned for Book 3. Was the Kess and Celine arc part of that original plan?
Actually, it was not. So what she's talking about is the hardcover version is different than the paperback. Paperback is a special edition of Song of Blood and Stone. I added 40,000 words. And
just 40,000.
It's a whole new storyline. If you read the hardcover, you didn't meet Ella at all. So the part that, not to spoil anything, but Ella appeared in Book 3, and there's a whole plot line with her and her husband and their family. That was always going to be a part of Book 3. And so basically I just took the characters of Ella and Ben, and that whole Kess thing was totally brand new. So I knew I wanted her to have a part in Book 3. I'm trying to think what, yeah, and it was just an opportunity to add some more, like, to broaden the world and add some backstory, and set the stage for one of the other antagonists. But even his storyline was kind of, that was brand new also for the special edition. That changed a lot of what I was going to do in the next books too, and I added that in. It was tough to do that.
That sounds like a lot of threading the needle that would have probably driven me slightly insane. But it said it worked really well there, so there you go.
Yeah.
So good, solid question. What are your influences in writing?
Influences, I read so much as a kid. I read everything. I loved the classics. I loved like Jane Eyre. I read The Secret Garden like every week. And then it wasn't until college when I got really more into science fiction and fantasy. So I did a little bit of sci-fi as a kid, but I discovered Octavia Butler in college. And then I was like, I'm going to try to read every Black woman in speculative fiction that I could. So Nala Hopkinson, Tana Reed Dew. So I think they're definitely influences. And then regular science fiction, like I loved Neil Stephenson and William Gibson. And less so fantasy. Like I got into like YA fantasy, but I never read a lot of the classic canon fantasy things. I read Lord of the Rings right before the movies came out. That was the first time I read them. But yeah, and then Gloria Naylor, who is more like magical realism, I guess. There's always something a little bit speculative and stuff that I liked, but not as much as like hardcore canon type fantasy.
It is interesting. I think that more people these days who are coming to write genre fiction don't necessarily have a background exclusively in genre fiction, or in the case of you liking Neil Stephenson a lot, like liking maybe sci-fi more than fantasy and not really engaging with the classical fantasy as much. And I think part of that has to do with classic fantasy can sometimes seem unwelcoming or all the same. Right. It's just not that... I loved Wheel of Time growing up. It was one of my first big fantasy obsessions, but it's very much, the white farm boy goes on an adventure. And in some sense, if you've read one of those, it feels like you've read all of those.
I did read some of those. My brother made me read some of this, but I think I was still in college or after college,
I think that was like junior high into high school for me. Like Knife of Dreams had just come out. So that was a big hype. For me, I kind of always was into speculative fiction. I spent a lot of time reading like Greek myth stuff, but a big avenue for me was actually video games and tabletop games. So that's where I got a lot of my speculative elements. And I think that you see those influences in a lot of people who are writing today, where it's not the same as traditional fiction in the genre. All right. So can you tell us about any of the writings you mentioned that might become books?
The short ones.
Yeah.
Well, the ones that have become books, I have a series that I self-published called The Cupid Guild. It originally appeared in a magazine, and they're short, like slightly paranormal romances. And one of them started as a failed NaNoWriMo, and the other one started on 700keywords.com. So those are out. There's other stuff in there. Like every once in a while, I will go back to the archive and look at these little snippets and be like, can I expand that? What was I even talking about? Do I remember what I was writing about? but most, yeah, I don't know if any more of them, not that I can think of, will become anything. Sometimes, like when I get an idea for a new story, I have a whole file and I write it down. And depending on how strong it is, I will like write down even like more details about it and flesh it out a little bit. I might write a couple thousand words on it. But I've been working on this series forever, and so I haven't had time to focus too much on other stuff. So yeah, I don't know if anything else will become. The other books that I have in progress are not new books.
So are you looking forward to having, once this book is done, once this fourth book is done, you will be free of this? Does that feel good, or?
Oh, it feels amazing. Yes. Like I love the series, but I'm so ready to go to some new, different world and deal with new and different people and things. Like I might come back to it. I have an idea for a far prequel, but that was another NaNoWriMo that like, it's a draft that's been sitting around for like 5 or 6 years that I would love to go back and finish one day, but not anytime soon.
Yeah, you definitely do hit a point of you love the thing, but you want to let it go and you want to do other things. It can be a little frightening sometimes, though, to branch out and do those other things. Like for me, after I finished Warrior Moon, I did a noir with Cereal Box, which was a completely different vibe from anything. And I was so worried that, people wouldn't dig it. But it's good to try and flex and leave.
I think it's important.
All right. Do you have any advice for Black authors and queer authors out there, either starting to write or who are in the querying process?
Keep at it. Like, don't get discouraged. I know that Own Voices and everyone says that they're looking for your stories right now, and some people are backing it up, and some people are kind of lip service, and it feels that way sometimes. But I really do believe that like the world needs your story, like you have a unique voice, and there's not enough yet. When I first decided to self-publish, it was because I heard these horror stories about traditional publishing being like, oh, we already have that one Black author, we don't need any more, or that one Latina author, we don't need any more this season or this year. But they have 15,000 white men authors. So
some of them have beards and some of them don't.
Right? That's not different. And yeah, so I've seen the changes since I've been publishing. I've seen many more people be given the opportunity. So I think the one thing that you need if you want to be an author is stick-to-itiveness. There's another better word for that that's floated in my head. But yeah, perseverance. And there's a lot of rejection, and there's a lot of all kinds of different crap that gets thrown at you, even once you are published. Like it's the same advice when you're pre-published as when you are published, because you're going to need that same quality. So just keep at it. Don't give up at all.
Yeah, I agree. Even from when Tiger was published to now, there's been such a change in publishing. I mean, obviously, there's still a lot of distance to go, but now we have so many more diverse authors writing, so many more voices, and the genre is really starting to shift. I think at the Hugos, I'm not even sure if like a cis white guy won any Hugos this year. I think it was mainly either people of color or queer authors, and that's also really heartening to see. So I agree. I think it's a good time to be writing, but the other thing is you do need to be able to take rejection, and you do need to be able to work constructively with rejection as well. This is good. What's the hardest part of creating such a compelling romance?
No, it's figuring out how it can be, I want to say natural. And natural isn't my biggest concern, because as a romance fan, like I'm willing to suspend a certain amount of disbelief, and there's different kinds of romance. Like natural for the style of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not doing like insta love. Some people might have to be fast, and that's fine. But that naturalness, and why these two people, like why them, why together, why are they the right fit? It can't just be because that's the hero and heroine, or that's the two main characters. There should be something that is emotional that will draw the reader in. and figuring that out can be difficult, and putting it on the page in a way that makes it seem like, oh, these people reasonably fell for each other in this period.
And also making characters who can complement each other, or sometimes they don't necessarily complement each other. It's more that they challenge each other, and that's where the attraction lies. There's a lot of different ways a relationship can go, and you have different relationships centered in each of the books, so you do get to explore different ones, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, and I thought that was important to sketch needs and to make sure that it's not writing the same thing over and over again.
Last one. What is the nicest thing anyone has said about one of your books or novellas?
Oh, wow. Because you do, like, I do one, one of my goals, like, and I write out my goals every quarter, is to be someone's favorite author. And so there have been times when someone said, you're one of my favorite authors. And that's literally the nicest thing that I could say to me and has said to me. And if I ever hear it again, it will still be the nicest thing, I think.
Yeah, it is nice when you hear that, because sometimes you get inside of your own head so much that you think, how can I possibly measure up? But the writing that you're working on will reach whoever needs to read it. For me, so somebody wrote a 45-minute long metal album about Tiger's daughter. And it is the raddest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. It is incredible. So sometimes when I'm feeling down about myself, I will just throw that on and just, man, somebody wrote all that about my book.
You know, that you inspire that creativity, that's huge, you know, that's like, and inspire people in some way, and that's totally amazing.
That's what it really comes down to, though, is writing is a conversation, and having that conversation and seeing other people be inspired is, I think, a really rewarding part of it.
Absolutely. That's that part of it where you put it out and it's theirs, and now everyone's to do it.
I have the bad guy's job of having to pop on and end the conversation. This, we are at that time, but this event has been so ridiculously awesome, and I want to thank both of our amazing authors. Leslie, congratulations on Cry of Metal and Bone being out, and congratulations on Book 4 almost being out, and potential freedom. And thank you so much to just thank you guys for joining us tonight and the amazing conversation and everything. Because I am a bookseller, I'm going to plug your books one more time. Don't forget, everyone, you can purchase, actually, you can get the whole trilogy signed for both of them. Well, not trilogy for Leslie's, but you can get the current 3 ones that are out signed. It's a beautiful buy signed book link down below. And thank you so much to our authors. Thank you so much to everyone for attending, for all of your awesome questions. And yeah, this was such a beautiful evening, and we are going to go ahead and sign off and say good night to everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Bye.